And good evening and welcome to this webinar on how to score 760 on the GMAT. My name is Rajat Sidana. I am one of the co-founders of e-GMAT and I'm going to be your main host today. Along with me, I have Sandeep, who's a GMAT strategy expert, and he's going to assist us during this webinar. In this webinar, we talk about three things. First, we talk about how do you define your GMAT strategy. Then we talk about what is the importance of core skills when it comes to studying for the GMAT, or importance of improving core skills. And then the third thing that we talk about is how do you create a trackable and repeatable study plan. And this is regardless of what your starting point is, whether it's you're starting at a 660 or a 460. We look at how should you create that plan, how should you make sure that you're tracking your improvement throughout this journey. This is a free webinar. It's quite heavily attended, and to make sure that we modulate and adapt this webinar to your needs, we asked us one leading question, which is, when do you plan to take the test, or how many days do you have before you take the test? If you haven't responded to this one, please do so. Based on the data that I have over here, what I really see is almost half of you haven't taken the data as of yet, and then we're kind of very similar number of people in all the other responses. More specifically, the first three, where we have about 10% of people who have their exam in fewer than 15 days, to those who have between a month and 45 days, and we have a few more people who have more than 45 days before the test. We also send a few video lessons your way. We will be solving one word problems question and one boldface question. So if you watch the video lesson on boldface, that's you'd be well equipped to answer that question. If you haven't, these video lessons are available as a part of your free trial. So you're welcome to go and take a look at them post this webinar. We also have some upcoming free video lessons. We have a proctored mini mock test on quant, which we call as quant workshop, in which we evaluate what your current quant score is, and then why your score is where it is. We tell you what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and we then help you create a plan specifically for you, so that you can work on your weaknesses. So think of this as a general strategy webinar, in which we teach you all the principles, and the workshop tomorrow is much more specific just on quant, in which we apply those principles and make each one of you create your personalized study plans. Then we have a free webinar on GMAT sentence correction, and this we look at how can you answer each and every sentence correction question by focusing just on meaning and logic. And that webinar is next Saturday. So again, it's a very, very heavily attended webinar. It's a very popular webinar that we have. With that, we now move into the webinar pane, or the presentation pane as we call it. So the screen will have changed for you, or will be in the process of changing for you. I'm going to mute myself for about 30 seconds to allow for the screen to change. All right, I think the screen will have changed for most of you. So there are essentially three parts of this webinar. In the first part, we'll talk about e-GMAT. For many of you, this is your first interaction with e-GMAT, so it'll give you a fair idea of who we are, what this company is all about, and what are some of the products and courses that we offer. In the second part, we'll go right into how do you create that strategy to reach that 760 score. And then towards the end, we will have an open-ended Q&A in which we will answer any questions that have not been answered in the first two parts of this particular webinar. With that, let's go right into the first part, which is an introduction to e-GMAT. So I asked this question, actually I haven't asked this question, which is, what is your target GMAT score? What's your target GMAT score? And I think since I'm asking this question, it's also fun to know, for those of you who know, who've taken a mock test, what is your current GMAT score? overall. And the second question has a fairly wide range. So okay, target GMAT score. I have 101 responses out of 150 odd students. Guys, if you're in this webinar, it's the best way to get the most out of it is just to participate. You're already taking the time out. I think you might as well get the most out of it as well. And then with regards to the current GMAT score, I have 92 responses as of yet 95. Let's get at least to 100 responses for the current GMAT score question. I know it has a few more answer choices than the first one does. All right, 97, 98 for current GMAT score. All right. So with regards to the target GMAT score, around about 70% of you are aiming for a score of 730 or higher. And with regards to the current GMAT score, what I really see is that about half the class doesn't even know where they stand. But 42% of you don't know your current score. Now the current score could be based on the actual exam or a mock test that you've taken. But out of those who know about where they currently stand, the bracket 610 to 650 is the biggest bracket. We call that as a score plateau bracket. And then there's a significant number of folks who are below 600 as well. So while 70% of you are aiming for a score of 720 or higher, actually, if I look at 720, the number would be even more. I can tell you statistically, only 6% of the people get to that score. And then this happens while the median scores at a number of business schools keep on going up. And this is data from the second half of 2018, which is out there. Now, what is it that people who actually get to that score of 720 do? A good number of them use e-GMAT. Why do we say that? If you look at stats on any one of the major forums out there, you're going to actually come to a very similar conclusion. When you look at the number of verified reviews, what you're going to find is there are more verified reviews for e-GMAT than are for all other major test prep companies combined. Similarly, if you look at the number of success stories posted over the last 12 months, you're going to arrive at a very similar conclusion. Again, these are only posted over the last 12 months or so. So what makes our students so successful? There's one thing that separates our offerings from the offerings of other prep companies. I think it would be our approach to GMAT preparation. So when you think about our approach to GMAT preparation or the architecture of learning that we offer, to understand how it's different from the architecture of learning that other prep companies offer, let's look at the two dominant architectures that exist today. There's what we call as the book-based approach, which is very popular in the industry today. It's been there for ages. And then there's the private tutor-based approach. Now, if you look at a number of prep courses out there, whether they're a classroom-based course or an online course, what you're going to find is that even though they may have audio-visual interaction, even though they may have live instructors, their core architecture is very much book-based. If you look at a private tutor-based approach and you evaluate e-GMAT against it, what you're going to find is there are many tenets of a private tutor-based approach that are present in e-GMAT. In fact, it's modeled behind a private tutor-based approach. So what are these two approaches? How are they different? And why is it that one approach leads to a much higher success rate? Let's kind of understand that, please. So let's see, how do you get to that 720 score? An efficient way to get to that 720 score would be to first create, based on your strengths and weaknesses, a journey towards that goal. Visualize how you're going to get to that 720 score. Then, for areas where you still need to learn concepts, learn those concepts, and then learn application of those concepts. Now, to be amongst the top 6 percentile of students, just merely learning the application isn't enough. You have to get so good at applying those concepts that you are among the top 6 percentile of all students. So once you do that across a number of concepts, that's how you get to that score of 730, 740, or 760. Let's look at how these two learning architectures approach these challenges or approach these answering these questions, starting with study plans. Now, a book-based approach is all about autonomy, which means that when you start studying using a book, you decide your own study plans. Books typically don't give you study plans by themselves. Now, they may give you a template, but it's not personalized to you. Where books excel is teaching you concepts. There are a number of books that will teach you concepts in an excellent manner. Now, while you may learn the concept, that onus of evaluation, whether you've learned it enough or not, is completely on you. When it comes to application, that's, in my opinion, where books actually lack the most. Just given the static nature of a book, they're not very well, it's not very well suited to telling you, hey, this is what you do in step 1, this is what you do in step 2 and step 3, and evaluating whether you're actually following that approach or not. So essentially, a lot of people who study using books, they learn application purely by essentially practicing hundreds and hundreds of questions. The last piece is the evaluation of mastery. And again, people who follow the book-based approach figure out whether they are amongst those top 6% or the top 2% of students by taking mock tests. And again, this onus of evaluating a mock test is completely on you. So overall, lots of content can be learned using a book-based approach, but a lot of onus of figuring out whether you're going in the right direction, whether you're learning as you're studying, is completely on you. A private tutoring based approach works very differently. Let's start with study plans. When you work with a private tutor creates a personalized study plan for you. He actually charts that an efficient path towards your end goal. Then a private tutor teaches the concepts that you don't know. And while teaching concepts, a private tutor evaluates whether you're learning that particular concept or not and gives you feedback accordingly. So similarly with application, a private tutor actually tells you how you approach a particular question. What do you do in step 1? What do you do in step 2? And if you're not doing that, a private tutor points out areas where you're still deficient. Then when it comes to the evaluation of mastery, a private tutor evaluates your ability to answer questions at various points. So what's the differences? What are the two differences between these two approaches? While you're learning the same content, in a private tutor-based approach, what you find is that that approach is a lot more personalized. There's a lot more feedback during your learning. So let's see why we say that e-GMAT is designed a lot more around this private tutoring based architecture. Okay, I'm getting some feedback about audio. Is the audio loud and clear? Let me just get in a poll question over here. Can you guys hear me clearly? Getting a couple of people saying that they felt that the audio was broken. All right, let's get a few more responses. Okay, it seems the audio is clear to most of you. For a few of you who feel there's disturbance, I would recommend that you guys just join again and the problem will sort out by itself. If you are using a mobile internet to access this, you may find that the audio is broken because your connection speed isn't fast enough. But other than that, the audio seems to be fine for 90+% of people out here. So let's see why we say e-GMAT's built around a private tutor-based architecture. So let's look at how would you go from a score of 600 to a score of 720, and through this example we'll illustrate why we say e-GMAT's architected much more around a private tutor-based approach, whereas some of the other courses that are prevalent in the industry are built on that book-based architecture. Okay, so let's see how do you get to that 720 score. The first thing, so we're talking about a student who's starting at 600 and who wants to get to the 720 score. So if you want to create that personalized study plan, the first thing that you need to do is create that path towards that goal. And we're going to look at two distinct approaches to get to that 720 score. We'll look at a verbal driven study plan and then a quant driven study plan. Someone who's strong in verbal should follow a verbal driven study plan. Someone who's strong in quant should follow a quant driven study plan. If you're not strong in quant, and if you're, let's say, weak in quant, then I would also recommend that you follow a verbal driven study plan. Now, the first step you have to decide is which scores are you going to aim for, because that will determine where you spend your time, how you allocate this time overall. Now, let's take the example of a student who chooses a quant driven study plan. I will share this session PDF with you, so once you get the PDF, you can actually see those detailed study plans for which the links are there at the bottom. So now that you have a target quant and a target verbal score, what you need to do is create more milestones. Let's see how you get to a Q50. There are many ways to achieve a Q50, and for this particular student, he chooses that he's going to excel in arithmetic and do really good in algebra or geometry. Similarly, this particular student decides that he's going to do really good in sentence correction as well as critical reasoning and do slightly above average in reading comprehension. So how do you get to these various recommendations? We have built a tool called GMAT Planner. It has a neural network running right behind it. It allows you to evaluate various permutations and combinations. It actually gives you a really good beginning recommendation, but if you want to modify that recommendation, it gives you that flexibility to do so as well. You can see all the same data that I showed on the prior slides in the screenshot for GMAT Planner. So when you do something like this, your overall GMAT preparation is not a black box in which you're studying. It becomes a set of 5 neatly defined milestones. If you hit those milestones, you can be very certain that you're going to hit that 720 score. What are those milestones? You have to improve from a starting level of, hypothetically speaking, let's say 50 percentile to 90 percentile in sentence correction, 45 to 83 percentile in critical reasoning, and so on and so forth in reading comprehension. And again, the corresponding levels would exist in quant as well. So that comes to study plan, and you can really see how using tools and by guiding you, we empower you to create your own personalized study plans. Let's talk about learning concepts. Now remember, a private tutor would teach you concepts and give you feedback on how well you've learned those concepts. e-GMAT's learning architecture is built very much like this. Here's what we call as one of the 12 modules that we have in our sentence correction course. This is the subject verb module. What you first see is how we teach concepts. There are a bunch of video lessons that we use to teach concepts. With each video lesson, there's an embedded evaluation in there. We give you feedback on how well you've learned. Once you look at this feedback, you can determine what you've learned, and which are the areas that you still need to work on. After this, we have, in addition to the evaluation within each video, after you've gone through the concepts, we have a concept level evaluation as well over here. Again, the feedback is given to you every 15 to 30 minutes of your preparation. Now, how does this compare to one of the other more popular courses out there? This is a course by Magoosh. What you really see is that this interface looks very similar to how a book is organized. You have a couple of video lessons. This time that you see over here is not the time that you learned, but the length of the video lessons. And there is actually no feedback out there. Now let's understand application of concepts. And remember, I mentioned that books are not suited towards application just because of the very static nature of this. At e-GMAT, to teach you what application of concepts, we've created this specific file type called application file, and you can really see that over here. In this file, we tell you what should you do in step 1, step 2, and step 3. After you go through this file, we have a specific practice quiz to evaluate your ability to apply concepts, and then we have a set of official questions which test the specific concepts so that you can really apply what you've learned not just on questions by e-GMAT, but also on the official content out there. And this is how we've designed every module, whether it's a quant module or a verbal module. That's kind of what we call as the architecture of our learning. Again, when you look at the Magoosh course, the first thing that you would notice is there is no application file. It's a bunch of concepts, and then towards the end, you have a quiz. Also, you don't see a score for this particular quiz. The intent is just to provide practice, not to give feedback so that you can improve. Let's look at the last piece, which is the evaluation of mastery. Remember, you had to hit those 5 milestones, 3 in verbal and 2 in quant to get to that 720 score. Now, how do we do that? We build this tool called Scholaranium, which has these things called ability quizzes, in which we tell you where you've reached in a particular subsection. Sentence correction, for example, is a subsection. Let's say you take an ability quiz, you get that 76 percentile. We then further give you insights as to why you've gotten this score. And in this case, this particular student needs to focus on comparison to go from a 76 to a 90 percentile in sentence correction. So while you learn the same content in each of these approaches, it's very easy to see why a private tutor based approach is a lot more personalized and how it is a lot more efficient in helping you get to that 720 score. Now, who's created all of this content? Some of GMAT Club's top 5 rated instructors have created this content. Instructors who've been reviewed a lot more frequently on GMAT Club. So while only 6% of the people score 720 or higher, a good percentage of them use e-GMAT. We are starting our next batch on 26th of January. I'm going to share the batch calendars. With that, I've come to the end of my introduction. If you want to stay updated with all things e-GMAT and also want to stay updated with most of the things that happen in the B-School world, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. We do share about 4 to 5 articles every week. With that, let's go right into the second part of this webinar, which is how do you get to that 760 score. So we're now in the second part of the webinar, which is the core of this webinar. A couple of questions that I have. What is the batch calendar? We offer 2 kinds of courses. One is self-paced, the other is instructor-led. If you want to join an instructor-led course, we recommend that you start 4 to 5 days before a batch starts. If you want to do a self-paced course, you can pretty much start anytime. So the batch calendars are for the instructor-led courses. Again, 60% of our students go with self-paced courses and they start anytime. For those of you who are inquiring for the fees, the fees is listed on our website. You can go there. If you have any questions, you can write to me at rajat@e-gmat. With that, guys, let's start the second part of this webinar, which is how do you get to that 760 score? Okay. So in this second part, we're going to divide this into 3 subparts. First is how do you define that GMAT strategy? While I was talking about that how do you get to that 720 score, some people asked, hey, what if I'm not great in either quant or verbal? What would I do? What if I'm great in just verbal, but I haven't studied quant for a very long time? How would I go about approaching this? And so on and so forth. So we'll look at how do you define your GMAT strategy. Then we'll look at how do you build those core skills. A lot of people think, hey, I'm going to learn concepts, then I'm going to practice a lot of questions and I'm going to ace the GMAT, because that's how they've aced a bunch of other exams. GMAT as an exam is designed very differently from some of the other exams that you may have taken, and this aspect of strengthening core skills is something which is very unique to GMAT. We'll look at why core skills are important to get to that 760 score or higher and how you can improve those core skills. Then we'll look at what we've learned in the first and second part, and we'll create that strategy where we'll track your improvement throughout your preparation journey. And as we do that, we'll look at various components of each GMAT course, why they're designed, and how they're designed to help you figure out whether you're improving or not, and then how to make the best use of the various aspects of the offering that we have. One of the other things that I want to make sure is that some people come into this webinar thinking that they're going to get some tricks that are things that are just special to e-GMAT, and they'll learn those tricks and be smarter than everyone else. There are two things over here. One is we don't teach tricks. The second is, in general, tricks don't work on the GMAT. If someone's going to tell you, hey, I'm going to get you this amazing shortcut that is going to help you ace the GMAT, I would say, save your time, save your money, and go somewhere else, because GMAT as an exam is designed to test core skills, not to test tricks. So with that, let's talk about your overall strategy. And so a lot of you have heard the word strategy. So I want to ask you, when you hear this word strategy, what does it mean to you? What comes to your mind with this term strategy? What is it, and why do you need one? Okay, let's have a few more responses. While people are responding, I also definitely get this thing over here from time to time where actually very commonly people say, hey, when it comes to GMAT, timing is the most important thing. If you can figure out timing, you can ace the GMAT. And that's because that's what you hear everywhere. Excuse me. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to prove to you that timing is actually the last thing that you should worry about on the GMAT. If you look at the structure of the exam, it's designed to test your ability, and we'll look at why that is the case. And the reason why I mentioned this to be really important is because when people start studying, they think about answering question as fast as possible, and as they do that, they stop learning. So let's look at strategy. 36 responses so far. A lot of you have used the word plan, and that's very appropriate. Why? Because a plan is a sequence of steps that lead you to your goal. So what is strategy? A strategy essentially is a plan of action which is designed to achieve a particular goal. Now, if this is what strategy is, then let's look at what is a good strategy. A good strategy is something that gives you maximum benefit. Now, benefit in the context of GMAT is score improvement. Okay, how does it give the maximum benefit? With the least input, and it does it by making sure that you first capitalize on your strengths, and then you spend enough energy on overcoming your weakness. Both of these are important. A lot of people ask this question. They say, hey, can you tell me how much time do you need to complete your course? And my response to that is, I cannot, because I don't know what your starting point is. There was a gentleman who asked a question saying, hey, can I go from 350 to 700? And there's another one who asked the question, how long will it take to go from a 600 to a 720? The answers to both these questions are very different. If you want to go from a 350 to 700, you need about 270 to 300 hours of preparation. If you want to go from 600 to 720, you're looking at about 90 hours of preparation. It's the same course, but your starting points are different. So when we say a good strategy provides maximum benefit with least input, the benefit that we are looking for is not the target score, it is the score improvement. And that's something that everyone needs to understand. You don't ace the GMAT by just studying a bunch of books or learning through a bunch of courses. You ace the GMAT by building your core skills. Okay, So there are certain hallmarks of a good strategy. First of all, it's defined. It's a goal-driven strategy. If you want to get to a 720 versus if you want to get to a 760, your strategy is going to be different. The manner in which you study is going to be different. When you move from one section to the other is going to be different. So it's really important that you have that specific goal in mind. The second thing which is there is a good strategy starts with an analysis of your current situation as well as your current strengths. Now, I'm going to ask a poll question here. How many of you, when you started studying for the GMAT, went to a friend of yours and really asked him or her, how long did it take for you to ace the GMAT, and assumed that you're going to take a very similar amount of time? How many of you did that? How many of you actually went to a friend of yours and really said, hey, how long did it take for you to ace the GMAT? If that person said 2 months, 3 months, 1 month, you said, hey, I'll be able to do that in a similar amount of time as well. 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll and broadcast the results. About 40% of you did that. Now, it's really good to have someone who's gone through this entire process. You do need support when you're studying for the test. But to take someone's study plan and to really assume that that's going to work for you can actually be catastrophic. Why? Because that particular person may be really good in quant or verbal and you may not be. That particular person may not have as taxing a job or as taxing a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a spouse as you do. Essentially, his situation, his starting points, his strengths may be different from yours. Another piece which people fail to take into account is the pace at which they learn. Each one of you has had 20 plus years of learning history. You know how fast you grasp new things. If you're someone who's not a fast learner, then you should account for more time. Now remember, no one cares whether you ace the GMAT in a month or 6 months. What people care about is whether you've actually aced the test or not. And especially someone who's starting in January, you have that luxury of time to a certain degree, because if you're applying to USB schools or most top B schools, even in Europe, your round one deadlines are still 5 to 6 months away. Okay. Make sure you take these assumptions into account. Why? Because if you don't take those assumptions, you actually pressure yourself. You don't learn things, you just simply read through things. Once you've done all of this, once you have that goal, once you have that starting point, which we recommend that you take a GMAT prep mock to get that, you create that study plan taking those assumptions into account. And typically, one thing that I really say is if you spend 5 to 6 hours creating and writing down your strategy, it probably will end up being the best investment that you make. Most people, unless and until they're studying full time, if they don't take the time out to create their strategy, what you're going to find is you'd be studying for the GMAT twice as right. You might not take the exam, but you're going to find that at some point or the other, you will have to sit down and create your strategy. And what you're going to find is the work that you've done till that time, a lot of that would go waste. With that, let's talk about one other term which is really important in the context of GMAT, that is percentile. What is percentile? A percentile is nothing but your relative rank out of a population. So let's say about 250,000 students take the GMAT every year. If you get a 760, that is 99 percentile, which means that if you get to a 760, you are among the top 2,500 students, or you have better than 247,500 students. If you get to a 700, you are in the top 12 percentile, which means you are among the top 30,000 students. Now, if you look at the top 15 or so B schools out there, they have a total of about 12,000 seats. So you can really see why a 760 or a 740 score is a lot more desirable. I'm going to talk about another term, which is accuracy. A lot of us follow this term. Why? Because it's really simple to use. What is accuracy? When you take a quiz, if you get 8 out of 10 questions correctly, you say my accuracy is 80%. So in other words, it's the percentage of questions that you answer correctly. Ability is a much more appropriate term on the GMAT. What is it? It is your percentile in a particular section. Let's say you take a sentence correction quiz, you get 8 out of 10. You can say my accuracy is 80 percentile. Now, depending on the difficulty of level, your ability could be 60 percentile. So again, the thing to take away from this is on GMAT, on the test, your percentile is a true measure. Don't worry as much about accuracy. So what's the first thing that you need to really do? Before you even start preparing, you need to define what your target quant and your target verbal scores are going to be. So let's look at what are some target quant and target verbal scores for various groups of people. What we've done is we have about 175 students in this webinar, and to make sure we address your needs, we've defined or we've divided you guys into 3 different groups. One is a quant whiz, the second is someone who's really strong in quant but not a quant whiz, and the third is someone who may be strong in verbal but not strong in quant. So if you're not strong in quant, you're in that third group. If you're a quant whiz, you want to get to a 700, I would recommend you get to a Q50 or a Q51. Accordingly, you only need to get to a V33, V34 to get a 700. If you're someone who's strong in quant, make sure you get a Q48, 49. Accordingly, you'll have to get a slightly higher score. If you're someone who's not strong in quant, and I'd recommend that you make your strategy verbal driven. Why? Because if you're not strong in quant, and let's say you're not strong in verbal either, in that case, your verbal, given the syllabus, given the extent of competition, is a lot easier to ace. So make your strategy verbal driven, and accordingly, get to the appropriate quant score. The key takeaway is we're going back to that definition of strategy, where a strategy is about capitalizing on your strengths first and then doing the appropriate amount of work on your weakness. What does Q50 or Q51 mean? That's a great question. On the GMAT, you're evaluated on quant and verbal independently. And when the GMAT evaluates you, it really puts you in what we call as ability buckets. These ability buckets are measured on a scale of 60. 51 is the highest score that you can get on a scale of 60, and then so Q50, Q51 are scores on those ability scales. Similarly, on the verbal side, we have a very similar scale as well. So they represent ability. Now, some of you may be saying, hey, if I have to study both quant and verbal, why does it matter whether my strategy is verbal driven or quant driven? Actually, multiple reasons why you need to make the determination very early on in your overall preparation. The first thing is, if you define the strategy properly, what you're going to find is, to reach the same end score, you're going to spend about 80 fewer hours learning. So if you're strong in quant and your strategy is quant driven, you're going to get to that 700 score with 80 fewer hours. Or with the same amount of effort that you'd get to a 700 score with a suboptimal strategy, you could get to a 760 score with an optimal strategy. So it's a lot more efficient. Now remember, acing the GMAT is not just about studying. It's also about building that ability. So if you define your strategy properly, the likelihood of success of that strategy is going to be a lot higher. You put in the effort, you will be a lot more certain that you're going to reach that end score. Why? Because you know that you're starting from a position of your strength. Again, case in point, Google versus Microsoft. If you had to bet on who's going to improve their search revenue more over the next, in terms of dollar amount over the next quarter, who would you bet on? It will be Google. Why? Because they are in a position of strength. It's a lot easier to improve from a position of strength, assuming there is headroom over there, of course, than to improve from a position of weakness. There's a question over there, a really great question. Don't B schools look for a score split between quant and verbal? Actually, they don't. If you go to any MBA fair, you ask them what's your median GMAT score. Pretty much every B school representative would know that. If You ask them what's your median quant or median verbal score, I will tell you 99 out of 100 B school representatives would have no idea. Why? Because I've asked those questions. So there are about 175 students in this webinar, and today and you're aiming for a range of scores. So how do you get to your personalized quant and verbal scores? Use this tool called GMAT Planner that we've devised to get there. Okay, I have a few questions. I have a question which is about, hey, profile. I'm not going to do profile evaluation now. You please wait for the last part of the webinar if you want me to tell you about profile evaluation. And the other question really was, hey, if you want to aim for a 760 score, you have to study both quant and verbal well. So what should you start with? Is it your strength or your weakness? I would recommend start with your strength. Again, if you're starting at a Q, let's say you want to get to a 760 score, your target quant score is Q50. You're starting at if your strength is quant, you'll probably start at a Q47. Going from that Q47 to a Q50 is going to be about 30 to 40 hours of effort. In about a week and a half, you'll be done with it, and then you'd really say, okay, the only thing that I have to focus on is verbal. Your mind would be a lot more clear. Now, a lot of people think, they say, hey, GMAT scores are not as important once you get to a 700 or a 720. And a lot of people really say, I only need to get to that score, and then I'd be good. I'll focus purely on my application. Which the truth couldn't be further away. Here is an article, which is about a 5-year-old article, but it's very true even today. The article was written for Americans, and the article was titled, On B-School Test, Americans Fail to Measure Up. This is an article that appeared in Wall Street Journal. If you Google the heading, you can still get to it. The URL is there. So essentially, the content of this article was that because of high GMAT scores from China and India, internally, GMAT, which is the organization that conducts the test, now provides separate scores for Americans versus Indians and Chinese to business schools. And this led to some very interesting implications for Asians. So here are some excerpts from this article. To address those concerns, GMAT in September, and this is September of 2014, introduced a benchmarking tool that allows admission officers to compare applicants against their own cohort, filtering scores and percentile rankings by world, region, country, and college GPA. So what are they doing? They're really comparing an Indian to an Indian, a Chinese to a Chinese, a South Korean to another South Korean. So essentially, you're getting regional ranks right now. Sarah Neher, who's the Assistant Dean of MBA Admissions at Darden, she said she was amongst those who contacted GMAT for help. And then she said, I need to be able to show my scholarship committee, which includes faculty, that this person is in the top 5 percentile of test takers in his region, even though that individual might not rank highly against test takers worldwide. So a few things. Darden's a top school, and it just shows that GMAT's really important even at top schools. The other thing is that you now compete against others in your region. You may be a 90 percentile overall, but if you are an Indian, compared to other Indians, you may purely just be an 85 or 80 percentile. Okay, what this means is you've got to do well on both quant and verbal. A 730 for an Indian is equivalent to a 700 worldwide. The other piece, which something that we always knew but was revealed for the first time in 2014, is that your GMAT score plays a huge role when it comes to fellowships. And the reason why I knew this was because I did my MBA about 15 years ago, and I had 2 full fellowships. I didn't pay a single dime for it, and it was primarily because of my GMAT score. Here's another data point which talks about GMAT score and your chances of admission. What you see over here is how the likelihood of admission into top B school increases with your GMAT scores. Again, this is data which is collected by GMAT Club. Here is a URL over here. And again, once you get the PDF, you can go and visit that URL. And a 50% likelihood of getting at Haas or Darden or close to 50% at MIT Sloan is incredible. Now, this isn't saying that GMAT score is the only factor. Remember that. But as you get towards those higher scores, the impact that it makes is definitely visible. And especially because it's one of the only variable factors that you can control. Now, I'm also a member of AJAC. Actually, e-GMAT as a company, we are platinum sponsors of AJAC. What is AJAC? AJAC is an association for admission consultants, and it's an association that that interacts directly with business schools. So every year in May or June, we go to a business school or multiple 2 or 3 business schools, and where we spend a week with them, and pretty much admission officers and deans from various business schools come to that one location. We talk about trends in admission. We talk about what is it the schools are looking for. So last year, or in 2018, this conference was hosted by GSB Chicago and Kellogg. The year prior, it was hosted by Stanford and Haas. Prior to that, it was hosted by MIT and Harvard. And essentially, here are some of the excerpts from the last year's conference. So a lot of people worry about multiple attempts, and we talked to schools, and they said, hey, we don't care about multiple attempts. We only take your highest score. So if you've not cancelled your score, and if you think that an attempt is showing up on your score report, don't worry about it. A lot of schools said, hey, if you've applied to a certain school and your score has improved, notify us. Let us know. Also, if you're waitlisted, improve your GMAT score if it's not top-notch. One admission officer from a top business school on the East Coast went to the extent saying that, hey, that's the only thing that you can improve on your profile. Why would you not improve your GMAT score if you're waitlisted? If you want to apply to Stern, if you want to apply to GSB Chicago, if you want to apply to Stanford, aim for a Q46 or higher, because these are quant-focused schools. A few schools mentioned that if you are in a competitive applicant pool, they would not look at your application unless and until you had a certain GMAT score. Said, we're going to use your GMAT score as a filter. And then pretty much every school confirmed that when it comes to scholarship, a GMAT score has a huge impact. Who were some of the participants? The schools that were participants were, you can really read the schools. Pretty much every top school was there. And with regards to the test prep industry as well as admission consulting, every top institute was there as well. If you look at AJAC's website, you're going to find any prep company worth its salt is a member of AJAC. LBS, again, the range of scores is 710 to 720. For Indians, they expect higher scores. Here's an example. So this was statistical data. Here's an example of a student, when I'm now going to present some anecdotal data where people have benefited because of high GMAT scores. Here's an example of a student who received multiple full fellowships. He received a full fellowship from Ross, a full fellowship from Keener Flagler, and an admit from Wharton. Took the GMAT 4 times and improved from V31 to V44. This guy is from Africa. He doesn't speak perfect English. He's a network engineer who worked for Nokia. And he scored a 98 percentile on GMAT verbal. How did he get to that 98 percentile? He used data to refine his preparation and figure out where are the areas that he lacked in. He spent less than $600 on his GMAT preparation and received more than $200,000 in fellowships. This next case is of a student. His name is Kong Bui. He received not 1 but 4 full fellowships, and in fact, he's now getting paid to study. He's studying at Ohio Fisher, and he's getting paid $1,700 per month stipend to study over there. He also received 3 more full fellowships. Now, again, if you watch his interview, as a 35-minute long interview, what you're going to find is, again, no extracurriculars. He speaks imperfect English, but yet he was able to get all of these admissions because he knew what schools needed. He kept things simple, aced the GMAT, and again aced the interview. He scored a V44 as well. A lot of people think, oh my God, can I get to that 98 percentile given that competition from Americans and Britishers and Canadians? Here are examples of non-natives getting there. There's another example of a student who never thought she'd get to a score of 650 or higher, and yet she was able to get multiple fellowships. Pravi is currently studying at Kellogg. Overall, she joined e-GMAT during her 5th attempt, and she saw that she could improve beyond 680, and then she kept on improving till she moved to that 740 score. This last example is a very unique example. She's one of our students. She scored a 770. She got admits from Harvard, Stanford, Kellogg, Wharton, and INSEAD. Every business school she applied to. Here is a quote from her. She said, "I firmly believe that you should have your own customized strategy as per your needs. While you can learn from other strategy, you should make your own. Also, over the course of your preparation, be flexible enough to adapt." She worked with e-GMAT. She also worked with one of her partners, MySA Review, for her application, and she's Poonam from MySA Review, who's the founder of MySA Review. She's been kind enough to allow us to share her journey with you. So again, all of these links are available in the PDF. You guys can take a look at those as well. So what are the benefits of a high GMAT score? First is, if you're aiming for a Columbia, if you're aiming for a Tuck, if you're aiming for a Wharton, if you're aiming for a Kellogg, if you get there, the enthusiasm, the confidence that you get over a 10-year period, that's easily $500,000 worth of impact. If there's one reason why you should get to a higher GMAT score of 740 or higher is scholarship. Why? Because if you're going for an MBA and you have to pay 150 grand versus if you're going for an MBA and you only have to worry about accumulating 50 grand, it's a world of difference. Also, your chances of getting a visa become a lot higher if you have a fellowship. And then I can attest to this because I had 2 full fellowships, actually 3 full fellowships when I applied for my MBA. When I graduated from my MBA, 6 months down the line, I purchased a house while my colleagues were still paying off their student debts. When it comes to securing a job in corporate marketing, corporate strategy, consulting, your GMAT score is priceless. Why? Because across the aisle, someone who's or across the table, the person who'd be evaluating your profile as well as looking at your resume will likely have a high GMAT score. And if he or she sees an equally high GMAT score on the resume, even before you enter, you will have that sense of respect, and that having that advantage in an interview can be priceless. And if you want, for those of you who want an alternate career, or if you want a security of an alternate career as a GMAT instructor, it's a very lucrative market. A lot of GMAT instructors earn $100,000. So yes, it's a great insurance. So overall, what are the benefits of a high GMAT score? Very high return on investment. It gives you confidence, and even though your GMAT score is valid only for 5 years, it stays with you forever. So with that, let's understand, how do you ace the GMAT? And it's almost been an hour since we've been in this webinar, so I'm going to really give you guys a 2-minute break to get a glass of water or something. It's 8:55 a.m. my time in Phoenix, Arizona. We will resume this second part of the webinar, which is how do you ace the GMAT, and the focus on ability and core skills in a couple of minutes. All right, guys, with that, let's go into the second part of the webinar, which is how do you ace the GMAT? So we'll look at accuracy versus ability. And again, remember, what is accuracy? If you need to take a mock test or a certain quiz, it's the percentage of questions that you answer correctly. Accuracy does not take the difficulty level of questions into account. And ability is nothing but your rank or your comparative performance on the test in a particular section or in a certain quiz. So let's understand this adaptive test and how is it that a computer adaptive test works. And to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to simulate the GMAT attempts of two different students. We're going to call them student 1 and student 2. Student 1 or case 1. So actually, let me just go through, make sure that you guys understand the axis. On the x-axis, we have question numbers, and you see question numbers 1 to 6. We're only going to worry about the first 5 questions. On the y-axis, what you have is the difficulty level of questions. The higher we go on the y-axis, the more difficult the questions become. Is GMAT similar to SAT? No, it isn't. It's actually very different from SAT. In fact, the new SAT is modeled along the lines of GMAT. It's still not the same though. GMAT's probably another 15-20 years ahead of the new SAT as well. So let's understand how an adaptive test algorithm works, and you'll really see why this is the case. So we'll look at student 1, which is the blue line over there, or the line that you see on the top. Remember, y-axis increasing difficulty level. The higher you go on y-axis, the more difficult the question becomes. X-axis is the question number. So student 1 or case 1 gets the first question, which is of a medium difficulty level. The first question is usually of a medium difficulty level or so. He gets that right. Because he gets that right, he gets the second question, which is of a much higher difficulty level. He gets that right as well. Gets the third question, which is of an even higher difficulty level. He gets that wrong. Then gets the fourth question, slightly lower difficulty level. Now, how do you figure out that that's of a lower difficulty level? If you draw horizontal lines from the third question as well as the second question, you're going to find that the fourth question is between question 2 and question 3. Gets that right, gets the fifth question, slightly higher difficulty level, gets that wrong. Now, as you really see that, what you really see is, the test is kind of narrowing down on the ability of this particular student. Case 2 or student 2 gets the first question, which is again of a medium difficulty level, gets that wrong. Gets the second question, which is of a much lower difficulty level or much easier question, gets that right. Gets the third question, which is again slightly more difficult, gets that wrong. Gets the fourth question, which is easier, gets that right. And gets the fifth question right as well. Now, if I were to ask you this poll question at the end of question 5, if I were to end the test over here, who do you think would get a better score? Student 1 or case 1 as we call it, or student 2? Three, 2, and 1. We end the poll, broadcast the results. 86% of you say student 1, and that is correct. Student 1 will definitely get a much higher score if we were to end the test at this point. Now, why do you think student 1 would get a better score? Why? Then the reason why I ask is because both of them essentially have identical accuracy. Each one of them has answered 3 out of 5 questions correctly. So why is it that student 1 would get a much higher score? Okay, I have 7 answers. This is a really important question to answer if you want to understand how the GMAT actually works. All right, Let's look at your responses. Initial questions correct. Correct answers on more difficult questions. Solve more difficult questions correctly. That is perfect. Yes. The reason why student 1's doing better is because he answered more difficult questions correctly. You can see the average difficulty line. Student 1 was served 5 questions. Each one of those questions was either at the average difficulty level or above the average difficulty level. Student 2 received only one question, the first question, which is at the average difficulty level. The accuracy in both cases is identical. The takeaway that I want you to have is your GMAT scores governed by your ability to answer difficult questions correctly. Why? Because the adaptive test algorithm is designed to increase your accuracy. So if you think about, or let me ask this question: why was student 2 offered easier questions? Why was student 2 offered easier questions? Think about it. All right, I see some people saying because he answered the initial questions incorrectly. The others are saying because his ability is lower. People who say his ability is lower, you are right on money. You are absolutely correct. The test, the GMAT exam is designed to increase your accuracy. Why? Because the exam can only evaluate your ability based on the questions that you answer correctly. So if you make a mistake on a medium difficulty level question, you by definition get an easier question. Why? Because your likelihood of answering that question correctly is a lot higher, or your probability of answering that question correctly is a lot higher. Some people really say, hey, the first questions are super important, and so I'm going to really focus on them. Yes, they are, but essentially, but not because the first questions carry more weight, but because the ability calculation algorithm makes a determination of your initial ability based on your responses to the first few questions. So when it comes to acing the GMAT, there are two challenges that you have. The first is to make sure that the test serves you difficult questions. Why? Because difficult questions carry way more weight. The second is to make sure that you answer those difficult questions correctly. Now, this was purely some anecdotal, or rather a simulation, a hypothetical simulation of how an adaptive test does work. Now I'm going to show you some real data. This data is from the older format of the GMAT, which is when the verbal section still had 41 questions. It applies to the current format of the GMAT with 36 questions in the verbal section as well, because the algorithm hasn't changed. What you see over here are two students. Each one of them have identical accuracy once you look at question numbers 11 to 41. So if you look at 11 to 41, that section, both of them have made 9 mistakes. Both of them have kind of a similar propensity of making mistakes. So with regards to the frequency of mistakes, it's very similar. So if you were to purely focus on question numbers 11 to 41, you'd say they're very similar. The only difference over here is the first two questions. And the first two questions, student 2 has made 2 mistakes in the first 2 questions. Student 1 has done the first 10 perfectly. Now, when you look at the difference in scores, and this is GMAT prep, so this is official, what you're going to find is that the second guy got a V32, the first guy got a V43. A V43 is 97 percentile on the GMAT, which means if 250,000 people take the test, he is among the top 7,500 students. A V32 is 65 percentile on the GMAT, which means his rank is 87,500. For those of you who are, or actually many of you looking at this, they would really say, oh my God, the test is really unfair. I make 2 mistakes and essentially I end up getting a much lower score. This is a really harsh exam. How many of you are thinking that way, that GMAT's a really harsh exam? A lot of people think that. And let me actually share this. Actually, GMAT is probably the world's best designed competitive exam, and I've taken a ton of competitive tests. What a lot of people don't realize, and for those of you who've taken other exams, how many exams are there in which you can make 11 or 9 mistakes and still get a 97 percentile? 9 out of 41 mistakes and still get a 97 percentile? Have you seen any other exam like that? Very few exams, right? And that's the beauty of this exam. Now, for those of you who are thinking GMAT's really harsh, let's apply this logic, or student 1 and student 2 to the model that we just created on the prior slide. Let's go over here. And this is where you'd understand the concept of ability on the GMAT. We'll look at case 2, the guy who got a V32. What is the difficulty level of the question what's the difficulty level of the first question typically on the test? What's the difficulty level? Average, medium. 50 percentile is usually a much more specific stuff. 560 is kind of more like it, not 600, but you guys get it. So you got a medium level question. He answered that incorrectly. Then he got a 30 percentile question. If you answer a 50 percentile question wrong, you get a 30 percentile question or a 20 percentile question overall. He answered that incorrectly as well. Now at this point, if you are an individual who's judging the other guy, and you are someone who actually is a rational individual, tell me what is the probability that a 90 percentile guy would get a 50 percentile question wrong and a 30 percentile question wrong, one after the other. What is the probability of that happening? Very less. For those of you who are much more mathematically inclined, who know the bell curve, what I will tell you is the probability of that happening is less than 1 in 10,000. Okay, so at this particular point in time, when we are at question number 3 over here, the exams, the question picking algorithm on the test, it's not very wrong to think that your student 2 is not a very smart guy because he got a 50 percentile question wrong and then a 30 percentile question wrong. So the next question that he gets is of a 15 percentile. He answers that correctly. Then question number 4 is 25 percentile. He answers that correctly. Then 35 percentile. Then 50 percentile. Then 60 percentile. Then 70 percentile, and so on and so forth. Student 1, on the other hand, got the first question correctly, which is 50 percentile, got a 65 percentile question, got that correctly, got a 75, 80 percentile question. He was answering 90 percentile questions right by question number 5. Okay, so even though when you look at these slides and you say, hey, they're just 2 mistakes, and you go and look a bit more deeply, the difficulty level of questions served to these students, that was very, very different, and which is why their scores are very different. Now I'm going to show you the abilities that these students have, and I'm going to look at these scores through the lens of ability. And what you're going to find is that even though from a lens of accuracy they look very similar, if you look through the lens of ability, these students look completely different, and we're going to look at that lens as well. Now this was GMAT prep. Let's look at another data point. But the key thing which is there is the reason why student 1 did well was because he got more difficult questions and he answered them correctly. The takeaway being your GMAT score is governed by your ability to answer those difficult questions correctly. Here's another data point of a student who improved from a verbal score of 17 to a verbal score of 40. Someone asks, hey, can I go from a 350 to a 700? If someone can go from a verbal score of 17 to a verbal score of 40, then yes, you can. Now, what you see over here, a verbal score of 40 is 91st percentile on GMAT verbal, and this 91 percentile on GMAT verbal is composed of 3 different abilities. 94th percentile in sentence correction, 73rd in reading comprehension, and close to 80 percentile in CR. Okay. He's been generous enough to write a debrief. You can actually download his enhanced score report from that particular link. Now, here's something which is interesting. This guy, the reason why I talked about this guy is because he made a ton of mistakes, but he made mistakes only after proving to the test that he can answer difficult questions. So this is his accuracy chart. So on the GMAT and on the real test, what you do is you get questions in batches. In the first batch, he did really well. He got close to 90% accuracy over there. In the second batch, he again had very high accuracy. Now, what that did was, these are medium level questions, difficult questions, he did really well. Over here, even more difficult questions. And that's when he started making mistakes. Now, it's okay to make mistakes when questions start to get really difficult. And essentially, the test didn't penalize him a whole lot. In the last batch, he answered half the questions incorrectly. He was still able to get to a 91 percentile. This is what we call as a build, maintain strategy. Now, for those of you who are worried about timing, here is something that I tell you. What this shows, if you truly have the ability, and I will repeat, if you truly have the ability, and if you can do well in the first two set of questions, which is the first 18 questions, take as much time as you want. You can actually randomly mark, if you've done well in the first two batches, then you can randomly mark questions in the last two batches and still get a very high score. The problem that you're going to find is, if you do not have the ability, regardless of the amount of time that you spend in the first two batches of questions, you're not going to do well. Just because spending more time on a particular question does not increase your chances of doing that question well. We have done those experiments. We get 1,000 students a month. So we collect a ton of data, and we know this. So when you really think, oh, GMAT's a test of timing, I've got to answer questions as quickly as possible, you can learn all those speed techniques. If you can't answer questions correctly, none of that is going to matter. But here is a data point where someone who could answer questions correctly made mistakes later on and still was able to get a 91 percentile on verbal. Remember these two guys, we just discussed them. One got a V32, the other one got a V43. Their accuracy seemed very similar. Do you remember them? All right, pretty much everyone remembers them. I love when people recollect things. Okay. You saw that this guy just made two more mistakes. That's not how the GMAT looks at them. This is how the GMAT looks at them. The 97 percentile guy had these abilities in SCCR and RC. The V32 guy had these other abilities. Now, when you look through the lens of ability, do they look very different? That's what matters on the test. It's the ability. And the reason why I want to emphasize that point is because it has a huge impact on how you study for the test. It has a huge impact, and I'll tell you why overall. So, some people ask, and while I was on the first part, and I think this question came in about 20 minutes ago, where someone said, hey, there are only 6 GMAT prep tests. So once I exhaust them, even the paid, if you include the paid ones, once I exhaust them, then do I just keep taking them again and again and again, and to improve? And again, this is the mindset that people have with regards to improvement. So do a lot of you have this question? Okay. How many of you are from what I call as the CAT background, which is an Indian test? How many of you are from that background where you've taken the CAT or have prepared for the CAT? A good number of you. A lot of people who are from the CAT background, they come with this mindset, I've got to take 50 mark tests or 20 mark tests to ace the GMAT. The GMAT's designed very differently, and I'll tell you why. Let's look at how the GMAT's different from a non-adaptive test, because the CAT or the older version of the GRE, if you took the GRE before 2012, they were non-adaptive tests. Now, what happens on the CAT is you go section by section, and in each section you're given a bunch of questions. Now, those questions could be easy questions, medium questions, or difficult questions. And each of these questions, regardless of the difficulty level, carries the same number of marks. So essentially, a person who gets 99 percentile on the CAT, the first thing that they do is they select the easiest questions and answer them. Then they select the next set of easy questions and answer them. Then they go on to the medium difficulty questions. And then, if time permits, and I'll say if time permits, they go and answer the hardest questions. So what becomes key to acing the non-adaptive test and a test where you can select the question is the skill of question selection. Why? Because the key to acing the test is not answering the hardest questions, but answering the easiest questions. When it comes to the computer adaptive test, every question is evaluated right then and there, which means you've got to answer the question thrown at you, which means the ability to answer questions becomes really important. Difficult questions on a computer adaptive test carry 3 times as many points as easy questions do. Accuracy starts to become irrelevant. Because on a non-adaptive test, because question selection becomes the key, the way to prepare and ace it is to really take a ton of marks, because you want to perfect your test taking strategies. When it comes to a computer adaptive test, you don't need a ton of marks. I mean, 4 to 5 marks is plenty. What you need though is that you spend 80 to 85% of your time building ability, enhancing your core skills. For those of you who've taken non-adaptive tests, or what I call as flat exams, isn't that how you approach when I look at this chart of the table over here? Isn't that how you approach the non-adaptive test? You take a ton of marks and you really say that's my key to acing the test, selecting the easiest questions, answering them as quickly as possible. That doesn't work on the GMAT. GMAT is about decision making. GMAT's about logical thinking. So if you bring in those CAT strategies on the GMAT, you're going to falter on the GMAT big time. But if you focus on learning things, you will ace the GMAT, and trust me, next year if you want to take the CAT again, which I don't know why, you will also ace the CAT. Why? Because you will have improved on your core skills. So one advice that I have for those of you who are from that CAT background is forget the CAT. Forget how you prepared for the CAT, because that knowledge, those habits are going to be counterproductive when it comes to preparing for the GMAT. So if GMAT's a test of ability, one of the biggest questions that you have is how do you measure ability? And how do you measure it again and again and again during your preparation? Because the thing, if you have to track ability, then that's what you need to measure. At e-GMAT, we built this tool called Scholarium, which has 70 plus ability quizzes. It's 30 verbal ability quizzes and 40 odd quant ability quizzes. And you get an ability score, which is nothing but your rank in each of these sections. Not only that, as I mentioned earlier, once you get a certain ability score, we tell you where you're lacking. And in this case, this particular student is lacking in comparisons and parallelism. You can really see from data over here. And when you get these insights, it's very easy to improve. Here's an example of someone who, we've talked about a lot of examples of people who've done well in verbal. Here's an example of someone who went from a Q35 to a Q50. She was a native speaker. She went from a 590 to a 750. Again, her goal was to apply to Harvard, Stanford, or Wharton, but with a Q35, these schools won't even look at her. She was strong in verbal, but realized that, hey, to get to a 700 or 720, she would still have to improve. She started at a V36. She started using a quant course, improved from Q35 to Q47 just by going through the core course. Then she used Scholaranium to go from Q47 to Q50. So Q47 to Q50 was purely refinement. And it's because of these insights, the quality of question and the quality of solutions that we have, which is why Scholaranium is actually the highest ranked assessment tool on GMAT Club. It's ranked higher than GMAT Club tests. It's actually ranked higher than the official marks from GMAT. And then why is it? Because highest quality questions, amazing in-depth solutions, the ability quizzes, and the analytics that you get with Scholaranium. So what have we talked about so far? We've talked about, hey, why is it important to strategize to prepare for the GMAT? Why should you figure out and spend those 6 to 7 hours to prepare your overall GMAT strategy? We looked at GMAT Planner. We looked at how you can use data from and insights from GMAT Planner to customize your study plan. Why is the exam is important when it comes to not just admissions, but also scholarships and fellowships. And then we looked at the linkage between GMAT and ability. And how you can personalize your overall preparation by leveraging data. Now, what is still to come? What are these core skills that I keep on talking about with regards to ability? And then, how is it that we help you learn those core skills? To understand about core skills, I'm going to make you solve a few questions. So the first question that I'm going to make you solve is a word problems question. It's a medium difficulty question. Here is a set of answer choices over here. Here you go. I'm going to give you a minute and a half to answer this question. I'm going to mute myself. All right, guys. I see a couple of people who can't see the question. Here's the question in the notepad, and then the answer choices are in the poll as well. So you guys can use that. I'm going to give you another 40 seconds to do this. All right, guys, last 5 seconds. Get those answer choices in. 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll, broadcast the results. Close to 60% of you marked choice B, which is the correct answer. Thank you very much. And then we have another poll question, which is, hey, how did you solve this question? And 87% of you saying you did so by making equations. Okay. It's really important to understand why you're able to do this by making equations very well. Is because for a lot of you, your brain is wired to solve this question by making equations. Now, for those of you who follow number substitution, one thing that I'll tell you is number substitution is, if you don't know how to make equations, number substitution is a fairly efficient method to solve this question. But because your brain's wired to solve this question by making equations, for you that seems to be a better method to do that. Okay. Now for verbal, that's something where we still need to really make those connections in your brain to make sure that it knows how to approach these questions. Here's a solution to this question. Now, the reason why we solve this question is because we wanted to understand what are core skills. So what are some of the core skills to solve this question properly? What are some of the core skills that you need to be able to solve this? You have the solution right in front of you. You can look at the solution and then think through it and really say, hey, what are some core abilities that allowed me to get to the correct answer? Okay, I'm getting some good responses. Comprehension, algebra, interpretation of English, statement analysis, stating the equations correctly. That's really good. Reasoning, very important. Okay, there are a couple that you're missing, and the ones that you put in are on the money. But there are a couple of core skills that I don't really see mentioned over there, which is a bit surprising because we've done this webinar, numerous times, and we usually see those mentioned right away. Okay. So when you think about this question, there are 4 core skills that you need at a very high level. One is the ability to work with variables. The second is to convert statements into equations. The third is to relate them. And the last core skill is to solve those equations. Even once you've related, you still have that solving piece. Now tell me what would happen if the core skill that you lacked was skill number 2, which is the ability to convert statements into equations. But the core skill you practiced again and again and again was the skill number 4, which is the ability to solve equations. What would happen if you did that? If the skill that you lacked was skill number 2, but the skill that you practiced again and again and again was skill number 4, what would happen in that case? Okay, I'm still waiting for responses. End up solving wrong questions. It will lead to incorrect answer. You wouldn't improve. Now, early on during the webinar, for those of you who've been there with me since the beginning of the webinar, I asked this question: what is your current GMAT score? A lot of you, the biggest segment of people who were there was stuck at 600 or in the 560 to 650 group. The reason why people get stuck up in that particular group is because they hit what we call as a score plateau. The reason why people hit a score plateau is because they don't know which core skills to work upon. Now, how many of you are thinking, do such core skills occur in other areas of quant, such neatly defined core skills? And the second thing is do such core skills exist in verbal as well? How many of you are thinking about that? Okay. All right. One thing that is there is that every aspect of quant and verbal has core skills. So they do, and they're very, very neatly defined. And to illustrate the core skills on verbal, I'm going to actually have you solve a bold-faced question. Now, but before I do that, I want to tell you, a lot of us as Indians, and I studied in India when I was growing up, we are really good at quant. In fact, there are aspects of GMAT quant which are fairly easy for us. In the same way, most natives are very good at verbal, and this is just an example of that. Now, I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I've been here for the last 16 years. I have a daughter who's now 11 years old. A few years ago, I was looking for a school for her, and so the nice thing about schools over here is that they allow you to tour various classrooms. And I was in the third grade classroom over there, and I was looking at the board. This is what third graders were learning when it comes to reading and reading comprehension: how to figure out author's purpose, how to do cause and effect reasoning, how to differentiate between fact and opinion. How do you make inferences when you read statements? How do you get to the main idea? What are details in a passage? How do you draw conclusions when you read a paragraph? The strategies that they were looking or learning were: how do you make connections? How do you do predictive reading? How do you ask questions to draw inferences and summarize and visualize information? When I read this and I spoke with the teachers over there, a lot of the strategies that that they talk about are the strategies that we talk about, again at a fairly advanced level, in our reading comprehension and our core skill building courses as well. When you think about this and you really say, oh my god, natives learn these things. How many of you learned these skills when you were in school? By the way, just a curious question. Most of us did not. My daughter can do pretty much all of GMAT reading comprehension. Probably she can't do the questions that he can't do are probably 700 level questions. And she can do medium level sentence correction questions. She's 11 right now. Not as father as daughter. So we haven't taught her anything. I mean, you run a business, you have no time to teach your kids. But it's just the education system is so good. So with that, we're going to solve a bold-faced question. The goal is to learn core skills. Now, a number of you probably don't know the best way. You have not studied boldface as well, but give it your best shot. Here are the answer choices. Actually, since some of you cannot see this, let me actually give you this part over here, this poll question. That way you can read the answer choices over here. And then I'm gonna also share the argument in a notes part. So you guys have 3.5 minutes for it. So read slowly and solve. I'm gonna mute myself, and then in another 10 seconds, I'm gonna put in a notes pane over here. All right, guys, last 15 seconds, get those responses in. Five, four, three, two, and one. Let me end the poll and broadcast the results. What you really see is choices C and D, really popular. Choice A and E, popular as well. Choice B, the least popular choice. Let's go on to this. By the way, how did it feel solving this question? Or rather, more importantly, how did you approach this question? Okay, confused. Facts and conclusion, challenging pre-thinking, statement by statement, comprehension, finding out the conclusion and evidence. All right. Pre-thinking the answer before looking at the answer choices. All right, that's good. I like that. Let's get a few more responses. Okay, reading the keywords. Guys, I'll tell you how we solve this question at e-GMAT. So what we do is we read and classify every statement in the passage. Now, boldface question has an argument always. So we look at the argument, we look at what's the conclusion, and create the logic, or what we call as the structure of the argument. Then we pre-think each of the bolded statements, and then we do option statement analysis. So what I'm going to do for this question is I'm going to go through each of these steps. Now, remember this, the reason why we are doing this is so that I can illustrate the core skills embedded in each of these option choices, so that you can really see that this is nothing but a test of these core skills along with a test of a unified method in which you apply those core skills. Okay, my goal here is not to teach you boldface. You will not learn everything about boldface in this. We have about 10 hours of content in our course on boldface. I cannot compress 10 hours of content in 10 minutes. It'll be it would not be doing justice to that. Okay, so again, the goal is to illustrate the core skills over here. Now, let's look at the first statement. First statement states stock prices of companies that exceed $100 billion in revenue, also called extremely large caps, or ELCs as they're in the bracket, rarely beat the market over a 5-year period. The first thing when you think about is the first core skill is to really say, hey, how do I classify a statement when I read it? Do I call it that it's a part of the fact group or an opinion group? And when you look at this statement, this is nothing but a data point, which means this is a fact or an observation about ELCs. Let's call this fact A. So when you say something is a fact, what you mean is it is something which is indisputable, which you're not going to dispute in the argument. Then we go to it and say it is commonly thought that this happens because the company is too big to grow faster than the overall market. Now, I will tell you, if I asked this entire group, what is this entire statement starting from it is commonly thought, and then 80 to 85% of you would really say that it's an opinion, whereas in reality, this is a fact. The opinion part in this is purely the bolded or the underlined portion, which is what we call as a general belief. Now, some of you may be confused. You say, how is it that the overall thing is a fact, whereas it has an opinion embedded in it? Because if it has something which is an opinion or a claim, then it can't be a fact. Again, that's one of those core skills, the ability to differentiate between the fact group and an opinion group. What is a fact? A fact is something that you don't question in the context of the argument. An opinion is something that is questionable. Essentially, an opinion is what someone thinks or what a group thinks. Okay, Example, it is 15 degrees outside. It is a fact. Why? Because it's a data point, it's proven. And when someone says it's cold outside, two different people can have two different opinions of what is cold. If you ask a Finnish guy and ask a South Indian, one would say, hey, 20 degrees is cold. The others would say 20 degrees is really warm. Let's look at this statement. And again, we're only talking about in the context of GMAT, where GMAT critical reasoning is a test of logic. The statement says, according to Business Week, Wharton is better than Harvard. So if you were to evaluate this entire statement, you would consider this as a fact. Why? Because you're not going to dispute, hey, according to Business Week, Wharton is better than Harvard. You're not going to dispute something that Business Week said. What you may dispute is whether Wharton is truly better than Harvard or not. You may really say, hey, Business Week, you say that Wharton is better than Harvard because of these three reasons. Here are my three opposite reasons why Harvard is better than Wharton. But in each of the cases, the fact that Business Week said Wharton is better than Harvard is indisputable, and which is what makes it a fact. Is that part clear? So in the same way, you're not going to dispute the it is commonly thought part of it, which is why this entire statement becomes a fact. So the overall statement is a fact and it has a belief embedded in it. Then let's go to the third statement. It says, however, studies show that ELCs that provide a higher return than the market over a 5-year period, a majority of them are run by their founders. So now you have two different data points that you learn from this. First of all, there is this group of ELCs that provide higher returns, and the second is there's a commonality to that group, which is a majority of those are run by their founders. Now the next statement, since most ELCs are run by professional management that is inherently risk averse, you found some new information as well that one, most ELCs are run by professional management and professional management is risk averse. The study's findings strongly suggests that the real reason why most ELCs don't beat the market is not because they're too big to grow, but rather they're run by professional management that is too risk averse. What is this? This is the main conclusion that the author is really trying to get to. And he says, this is what the author thinks why most ELCs don't grow. He says it's not that they're too big to grow, but because they're run by professional management, that is why they don't grow faster than the overall market. Let's now get and kind of create the structure of the passive. You already know most of it. What is this? This is your conclusion. What is this? This is the data point that supports the author's conclusion. In this point, we really figure out that most ELCs are run by professional management. This is used by the author in making his conclusion. Statement 3 also supports the conclusion. Why? Because it provides evidence of ELCs that actually can beat the market. Statement 1 is just a data point on which a general belief about ELCs is based, and statement 2 contains that general belief about ELCs that is challenged by the main conclusion. Take a few seconds. Read the structure. This is what we call as the logic of the argument or the structure of the argument. Fairly simple. In the context of the GMAT, this is a fairly sophisticated argument. Okay, and if you're able to get this structure, that's great, especially for those of you who've just started your preparation. Okay, so let's understand what do boldface 1 and boldface 2 do. Remember, boldface 1 is this statement, which is a majority of them are run by their founders. Boldface 2 is this entire piece over here. So what is a majority of them are run by their founders? It's a data point or a fact. Okay, it is a characteristic of the companies that buck the trend or that do better than the market, and it's a fact or a data point which supports the author's conclusion. Boldface 1 clear? What is boldface 2? Boldface 2 is the reason for the observed trend. What is the trend? That most TLCs don't beat the market, rarely beat the market. It is also the reason that the author believes why that happens. Why is it that most TLCs don't beat the market? It's not because they're too big to grow. It's not that they're too big to grow, but because they're run by professional management, which is too risk averse. That is why they don't beat the market. Okay. Is that clear as well? Let's look at the answer choices and select the correct answer now. Okay. Now, choice A says the first is a majority of them are run by their founders. It says the first is a claim. Okay. Now, is the first a claim? Is the first a claim? No, it is a fact. It's a data point. We don't dispute the accuracy of that. That is wrong. That is wrong as well, which is why choice A is wrong. Okay. Let's go to E for elephant. That choice says the first is evidence, which is the first provides evidence to refute something. What is something? That an explanation that the argument favors. What is another term for an explanation that the argument favors? Another term for that is a conclusion. Now, if you look at this argument, there's only one conclusion that it favors. Which is that conclusion? It is the main conclusion of the argument. And again, this is where it gets slightly sophisticated for those of you who are not getting it. This is the main conclusion of the argument. So what choice E is saying is the first provides evidence that makes you believe less in the main conclusion. Is that true? Does the first make you believe less in the main conclusion? No, it is not refuting. Evidence part is okay, but it doesn't go against the main conclusion, which is why choice E for elephant is wrong. Let's look at D for delta. It says the first is evidence that has been used to support something. Okay, what is it that's been used to support? An explanation that the argument challenges. Which explanation does the argument challenge? Which explanation does the argument challenge, guys? No, the argument doesn't challenge the explanation. The argument always believes or furthers the conclusion. Too big to grow. Yes, that is excellent. The explanation that the argument challenges is this one over here. The companies are too big to grow faster than the overall market. Thank you. Nilakesh, Sonal, as well as Abhilash and Santiago. A bunch of you have already said that. Yes, that's great. So the first is evidence that has been used to support, according to choice D, too big to grow. Does the first make you increase your belief that ELCs are too big to grow? No, it does not. It actually gives evidence of ELCs that grow faster or which are not too big to grow. So that part in choice D is wrong, which is why choice D is incorrect as well. The correct answer, which is choice C, says, let's look at all the aspects of choice C. The first is evidence. We said evidence is okay. That has been used to support something. What? An explanation that the argument favors. What is an explanation that the argument favors? We had that over here. We said that's the conclusion. Does the first increase my belief in the conclusion? Absolutely. The first definitely increases my belief that hey, ELCs can grow faster than the market, or ELCs are not too big to grow. And what is the second? The second is that explanation, or second is the main conclusion. This is correct, this is correct, this is correct, as well as this is correct, which makes choice C for cat absolutely correct. Now you can really see, the correct answer is not just the best of all the other answers. It is the only answer that is correct. So for those of you who really believe that on the verbal side of the GMAT, you have to choose the best amongst the given answers, no, that doesn't happen. On the real GMAT, there's only one correct answer. Okay. Now, why did we do this question? What is our goal? To learn what? Core skills. Let's look at some of the core skills over here. There are essentially four core skills in this that are tested in boldface. One is the ability to classify a statement. The second is how to relate the statement to the conclusion or main point. We saw that that was tested. The third is how are the statements related to one another. In some instances, the bolded statements may not include the main conclusion. So in that case, you have to really figure out how they relate to one another. And the last is the ability to read the answer choices properly and evaluate them and figure out which aspects are correct, which ones are not. Where do you learn all of this? In various parts of the course, starting from a premise and conclusion, which are the foundation files, to the strength and weakness, to the files, to the boldface files as well. Now, if you look at the answer choices, you can really see the core skills right then and there. The portions in red are the portions which are incorrect. When you see the first is a claim tests your ability to determine, to classify the statements. The accuracy of which is at issue in the argument tests your logical structure of the argument. Choice B said the first is an objection. What is an objection testing? Your ability to classify the statement again that has been raised against a position defended. All of that is a logical structure. If you understood the logical structure of the argument, you would have said, hey, that's not what's happening. This argument is not defending any position. This can't be right. Choice D for delta. Remember, C was the correct one. The first is evidence that has been used to support an explanation that the argument challenges. Again, had you looked at the logical structure, you would have said, no, that is not happening. The first actually supports, goes against the explanation that the argument challenges. And again, the links between the two statements. Choice E, again, is the logical structure. Again, if you chose one of the incorrect answer choices, you can really see how you got played by these core skills. And if you had those core skills, how you would have rejected those answer choices. Can you guys see that? How these core skills surface up in the incorrect answer choices and make you choose one of them. Look at them again. Look at that the reason why you chose one or the other answer choices was because you lacked one of these core skills. If you improve on your ability to classify statements, if you improve on your understanding of the logical structure of the argument, if you improve on your understanding of relationship between the two statements, be able to reject these incorrect answer choices. Your probability of getting to the correct answer would go up tremendously. And which is what has happened throughout your life. In word problem like questions, as you're able to solve equations, as you're able to convert statements into equations better, you're able to do more word problem questions correctly. The same principle applies in every question type on the GMAT. So, what are some of the key questions that you need to answer after you create a study plan? First is, as you're creating the study plan, figure out how much time you need. We have some excellent estimates as to, if you have your starting and ending score, how do you define your time? If you need more time to study, talk to people who can make time for you. I'd really recommend talking to your spouse, talking to your boyfriend, girlfriend, to your boss. Plan on taking vacation days for your preparation if you can. 4 to 5 vacation days over a 2-month period can have a huge impact, much stronger impact than what people expect them to have. Create a strategy. Don't skip on spending time towards creating a strategy. If you're an e-GMAT student, go through the Your Study Plan course. If you need help in creating a strategy, write to us. A lot of people think they can do really well by reading books and doing official guide. Yes, official guide is an excellent practice resource, but it doesn't teach you core skills. You have to build on your core skills. And when it comes to assessments, measure your ability again and again every 30 to 40 hours of your preparation to make sure that you're going in the right direction, and use data to isolate your core skills. So this last part is, if you're an e-GMAT student, how can you make the most of it, and why is it that our courses are designed the way they're designed? Now remember, this is a screenshot from your ESR. What it shows is that your verbal score is an output of various abilities. There's a causality in this chart over here. The reason why you get a V38, which is this part over here, is because you have these abilities. Again, going to the part that GMAT is a test of abilities. So how do you build these abilities? Because GMAT tests abilities. Or how do you get a good GMAT score? Actually, getting a good GMAT score is very predictable. Why? Because when you think about your score out of 800, it's built of your quant and verbal scores. And each of these scores are out of 100 or out of 60. Your verbal scores are built on 3 ability scores, which again are measured out of 60. Your quant score is built of actually 4 ability scores in arithmetic, algebra, geometry, or PSDS. Again, these are measured out of 60 or measured out of 100. So when you look at this and you say, hey, it seems that acing the GMAT is not, it's very measurable and predictable. It's not something where you're studying and really saying, oh God, let me get a 720. You can actually predict whether you're going to get a 720 or 740 or 760 or not. If you measure this improvement, again, you don't need to take a ton of marks, which is what we do, frankly. We measure this improvement and we give you tools to track this improvement, which is why this is what an average e-GMAT improves. Now, some of you may question, hey, why 45 points on quant and 75 points on verbal? It's just because a lot of the quant students who join us are already at a Q42 or so. So the headroom in quant isn't as much as it is on verbal. The thing which is there is, hey, we track this improvement, we guarantee this improvement, and we give you tools to measure this improvement. Most of the other prep companies don't do that. They don't even guarantee it. And the reason why that is the case is because the traditional test prep is not designed to help you improve. And it's designed in what I call as this book-based architecture. And when you think about how a traditional test prep is done, here is how it happens. You join a prep company, you get a ton of books, so you read from it. Now, 80% of your learning happens through these books or through these booklets. The problem that I have with this method is when 1,000 people go through a lesson in a book, they learn to 1,000 different degrees. A book doesn't give them feedback that what that degree is and where is it that they need to focus on. So people come in underprepared into classrooms. When they do that, that's where a lot of the application learning happens. Now, unfortunately, for the GMAT, there are very few good teachers. Trust me, because I've tried to hire them and I can't get them. We have to train people to do that. Even when you have good teachers, they go through that one-to-many model and they don't know how to use technology to get data about whether students are actually learning or not. So you learn through books, you go through, you attend a few classes, and then you take mocks. That's the first time that you're evaluated in most prep courses. You get a score, you get a quant score, you get a verbal score, but beyond that, there's no integration as to, okay, where should I focus on in quant and verbal? That analysis is completely on you. And in the absence of that focus, you end up using accuracy as a measure, which we've seen is a really bad measure on the GMAT. When you think about alignment with the architecture of GMAT for these courses, there's only alignment at that mock test stage. And because of this true assessment and very little feedback at preparation stages, it leads to a lot of rework for students. People get frustrated. They prepare for the test twice, thrice, 4 times. And a good number of people just give up. They really say, I'm happy with the 650. Let me get to whatever B school I want to get to anyway. And they give up on the dream of 750. When we thought about creating e-GMAT, and both Pyle and I were technologists, by heart, and educators by heart, or technologists by profession, educators by heart is what I would say. Our parents are educators. We said we need to have something that combines technology and gives that level of personalization that a private tutor does. And because we were fortunate that our parents acted like private tutors would do with us. So we created a course which had this amalgam or integration of learning concepts, learning how to apply concepts, and giving you feedback on how well you've done with regards to applying concepts. And that is depicted in this module over here. We talked about the subject verb module, and we have seen this over here. I'm going to show you another module which is a lot more, which goes into this in a lot more detail. What you see over here is conceptual learning, application learning, and feedback at every stage. And when you look at the integration with the architecture of the GMAT, it's not just integrated at this stage, which is your subject verb sentence correction stage, but it's integrated over here at subject verb as well, where we give you feedback on concepts in subject verb and application in subject verb, and so on and so forth. And when you get that feedback and you self-correct yourself, there is no reason why you won't get to that 90 plus percentile score. The key thing over here is you don't get to that score just by studying, but you need to perfect things. And that's what this architecture ensures. Ensure that there are very few holes, if any, that are left in your preparation because of this data. Here's an example of another student who went from a 40 percentile in sentence correction to a 90 plus percentile. She is someone who got admission into ISB overall. So when you think about a course and what it does, now it's not just a bunch of video lessons that help you succeed. It's an integration of three things. One is the process, which is the content as well as the way you apply that content. So learning the concepts and applying that concepts. The second is the insights that we provide to you, the feedback that we provide to you through data. And that's in video lessons and as well as in ability quizzes. Now, a lot of people provide video lessons, but very few of them build the technology to essentially get that data from video lessons. We build that technology from grounds up. And if you go on our website, you look at our team, you're going to really see that we have a team of about 40 people. Each one of them works full time. And then you have technologists, you have people who design e-learning, you have subject matter experts, you have specialists in support, you have specialists in pretty much every department that work full time. When you compare that with most other prep companies, you're going to find that the same is not the case. They have a lot of subject matter experts, 90% of them work part-time. And that's why you don't see them rated on GMAT Club. The third thing that helps you succeed is that extent of personalization, where we give you data through Scholaranium, through the custom quizzing engine. We allow you to create quizzes on your area of weakness and figure out whether you've actually improved or not. And stuff such as GMAT Planner that have neural networks running behind them. And how all of these come into play is there's another example of a verbs module where again you can see how data helps you. You learn these concepts over here, you get feedback, you learn the first level of application, you get feedback, you get the second level of concepts, which are more advanced concepts, you get feedback over here, and then you get that evaluation just in verbs, and this is purely verbs. Okay, now in this, when you look at this and you say, if in my final practice quiz I have that 60%, why that 60%? It's very easy to see. You messed up in sequencing, you didn't do as well in learning application, and in conditional verbs you're not doing as well. So if you go back and revise those and take that practice quiz again, you can go from 60 percentile to 90 percentile ability in verbs in just 1 hour. Show me another course that's able to do this. So this works not just because we make these amazing video lessons that have wonderful animations and beautifully synced audio, but because it's combined with data, and it's combined with that extent of personalization that doesn't stop at that 650 score, that helps you improve from that, from 500 to 650, 650 to 700, and 700 to 760, and it gives you the power to do that. Use that power, use it well. If you need help, do write to us. To summarize, GMAT, when it comes to GMAT as an exam, you can't ace the test by learning tricks. It is a test of applying concepts. It's a test of logical thinking. And to be able to do well on the test, you need to build that logical thinking. And the way you do that is by building your core skills. Once again, I'll repeat that you spend the time to build your own strategy. If you don't do that, you're going to find that you end up wasting a lot of time in your preparation. In the end, take a look at the free trial. Look at this learning methodology and see if it works for you. If you have questions, you can write to me at rajat@e-gmat.com. With that, good luck and thank you for spending the time with me today. It was a pleasure conducting this webinar, and I hope to see you guys on e-GMAT.com. Let me share the session PDF as well as the batch calendar. Now, for those of you who are joining using a tablet or a cell phone, you guys probably won't be able to download the files, so I will be happy to send those files with the recording. All right, guys, with that, it'd be great if you guys can provide some feedback on the webinar. It allows us to really understand what is working and which are the areas where we can improve. If you can provide the feedback in the short answer pod over here, that would be wonderful. Okay, how many questions can you get wrong on quant and verbal and still get a 760? It just depends on quant, probably. It depends on the score that you're aiming, score split that you're aiming for. It depends on where you get those questions wrong. So on the quant side, if you're aiming for a Q50 and V42, which is what you'd need to get to a 760, then probably you can make mistakes, probably make 2 or 3 mistakes on quant, provided they are in the last 12 or 13 questions. Can I give an example of a personal strategy? Okay, yes, let me just share. As an example of a personalized study plan and the principles to really do that. The cost of GMAT Live Prep, does it include the tutor or does it have a different price? So it includes instructor-led sessions. Yes, it does include that. We don't provide private tutoring as such. We empower, our technology empowers you to get so that you get a similar kind of feedback. So, but GMAT Live Prep includes sessions with top instructors that happen on the weekend. Does the GMAT reward you for finishing the exam early? No, it does not. Again, it's a test of ability, not time. Okay, guys, don't put your questions in the short answer part. Your questions are for Q&A part because it allows me to share examples with you. For those of you who really said, hey, how can I improve my quant score? Here's an example of someone who actually improved her quant score. When should you be taking the GMAT for first deadline? I recommend everyone to get done with their GMAT by April. That way, if you do need to retake the test, you can still do that and have enough time. The other benefit is if you're done with the exam in April, you have a great score, you go to admission consultants, you get an amazing discount from them. because that's the time when a lot of admission consultants are very available. Will the content help with executive assessment as well? So the executive assessment is, in short, yes, but you won't have to go through the entire content. The executive assessment is primarily critical reasoning and integrated reasoning. So yes, it will help. It's just that you'll have to do portions of the content, not the entire content. What if someone runs out of time to answer difficult questions correctly? If you do the questions properly, you won't. But again, we have timing strategies that we tell you. In the end, if you have 5 questions left in 2 minutes, just mark them randomly. That's what I would really say. Here's an article on time management strategies. Are we planning to launch executive assessment? Not really. It's just that so few people are taking executive assessment. For us to launch a course is about 3,000 to 4,000 hours of effort, and it's just the returns are not there, unfortunately, for us. Do we need to study from any other source? If you take up the course, you don't. All we ask you is to have access to the official guide. That's it. But other than that, you don't. You will get all the learning and then all the assessments with the course. Does GMAT put a penalty for not answering all questions? It does, and that's why I really say randomly mark questions if you're running out of time. But essentially, prior to that, make sure that you actually have a timing strategy that you don't fall short on time. How many marks do you get with e-GMAT? You get 5 full-length marks with e-GMAT. In addition, you get the entire Scholaranium platform that has questions which is equivalent to about 20 mock tests. What are the best tests if you've exhausted the official guide and Manhattan tests? You use our Scholaranium ability quizzes. Those are really good. By the way, if you've done that, then essentially you shouldn't be taking mock tests anyway. You already know how to get through a 4-hour long exam. Focus on building ability. Ishan says I was planning to do the official guide before doing the course, but since you have the course, I can start right away. The answer is yes. Don't do the official guide before doing our course or before doing any course. Even if you're not doing our course, don't do the official guide. That's a wastage of really high quality questions, because if you do the official guide without building an ability, it's not going to be useful. So don't do the official guide without learning the concepts. What's my opinion about an evening MBA program at top 20 schools versus a full-time program? They both serve different needs. An evening program is designed for career professionals who want to continue in their current career. So if you are one of those students who says, I'm happy with what I'm doing, but I just need a little push to get to that next stage in my career, I'm not looking to change my career, then an evening MBA is perfect for you. So it's a career enhancer, not a career changing program. But if you're looking to change your career, if you're someone who's, let's say, in technology, who wants to go in marketing, then a full-time program is what's designed for that. So again, it's what your goals are. Can you get a personalized strategy after 1 month of preparation? Yes, you can. Yeah. As I said, we have people who do this day in and day out. They're full-time on this. Okay, strategy for reading comprehension. Take a look at this. Is full-time 1 year executive MBA really useful? So it depends on where. So if you're talking about an executive MBA in the United States or in Europe, then those MBAs are designed for working professionals and are typically sponsored by companies. And again, they are career enhancers. So um, someone who's a manager or a director may do an executive MBA to reach a VP position, and for them they're extremely useful and they're well architected for it. So when I was at Stanford a year and a half ago, talking to their dean, they and Wharton as well, what they talked about was that if you're doing an executive MBA, and we were talking about, this is Silicon Valley that we're talking about, you ought to be either company sponsored or you ought to be working for a startup where you make enough money where we can really say that, hey, you can pay for executive MBA from your own pocket. So yes, in that case, it is really useful. But an executive MBA is not a career changer; it's a career enhancer again. Ishan says, I've heard that verbal questions are and 800 scores are not up to the mark. Yep, I mean, they're not e-GMAT questions. You'll also hear that Scholaranium questions are the closest that it gets to the official tests. What's your chances of getting into top 20 B school at the age of 40? You're an IIT Bombay guy, I believe is what I hear, plus MS from US profile. If your reasons for doing an MBA are excellent, then you have a very strong chance. I was at UCLA Anderson again a year and a half ago in the same trip where when I visited Stanford, and the oldest guy who was there in UCLA Anderson's full-time class was 47 years old. So here is a blog post that you may find useful. There are also some examples of older students over there. Management consulting, what should you do with your specialization? Your specialization is management consulting. Now, if you've worked in a certain industry more specifically, then you can add that to it. If you've studied for GMAT for 2 months, but my score is still 540, what should you suggest? Is GRE a better option? Depends on whether you want to do an MS or an MBA. So here is another article in which we've compared GMAT versus GRE, and you can really see whether where one may be better than the other. Which material do I recommend apart from e-GMAT and OG? Nothing. You don't need anything else. What is the practice source that you recommend apart from GMAT Prep and 800 score? I mentioned a tool called Scholaranium. It is the world's highest rated assessment tool. It has more questions than you would need. If you want to read reviews for Scholaranium, you can go and read them over here. Do you think 8 weeks is enough time to get to a score of 750? Again, it depends on your starting score. Here are a bunch of study plans to get to 760. Now, again, you should create your own study plan. This gives you a few templates on how do you get to 760, how do you estimate the amount of time needed. If you feel the difficulty level is high and you've exhausted more than 3 minutes on a particular question, what should be your approach? First of all, don't exhaust 3 minutes, Durga. In the first minute, you should know that you're going to attempt that question or not. But if you have and you still have no idea, move on to the next question. What exactly do you miss out on taking if you take an online package and not a live one? You miss out on interaction with an instructor. You miss out on essentially being part of a cohort where you're not learning not just from the course or from the instructor, but also from the experiences of other students who are preparing at the same time, which, by the way, can be very enriching. So again, you want to really look at this. You can look at the reviews of our live courses, and again, see what people really say. All right, guys. Can a tier 3 college student go to a top 3 school and and what's the GMAT score required? Can you? Yes. What's the GMAT score required? I would recommend going 20 to 30 points above the median score. Will you have access to the recordings if you miss a session? Yes, if you purchase a live course, you will have access to recordings. In fact, if you are someone who's from Merchant Navy, you can, or if you're someone who's a doctor or so, where you have a concentrated amount of time right now, and then essentially you can't attend the live sessions live. That's what a lot of people from Merchant Navy do. Okay, guys, with that, we've come to the end of this webinar. If you have questions, don't hesitate to write to me at rajat@e-gmat.com. Thank you very much. Have a good day and study well for the test.